What's going on, Illumineers, and welcome back to the madness. As you can tell from the slideshow, today's video, we're talking about SteelSong. We're talking more specifically, though, about the Mulligan and then kind of the first couple plays with that Mulligan. Any deck that has a lot of high uninkable count, it's gonna make your mulligan a little difficult. It's very easy with Steel Song to go for the super high roll explosive start and you just see everything and you just win. But what happens if you don't see the high roll plays? How do you then optimize your hand? Because you can't afford with some of these lists that are running 18, 19 on inkables, even 16 or 17, you can't afford to mulligan five because then if you pull into, four, three, four, five on inkables, you've lost the game. So how do you optimize a less than ideal hand so you can still go about getting the win? So that's what today's video is about. I'm going to highlight, we're going to look at mulligans for a couple of the different main play styles, that being the double shift line, Decandio song, and one shift line. We're not going to go in depth into any of those decks. We're not going to talk about tech choices or anything like that. Those will be different videos. This is strictly how would you go about doing the mulligan and what would your early turns look like. So with that being said, let's just jump right into it. So right off the bat, let's talk about the blind mulligan, and let's talk about something pretty important. Right now, a lot of people are training using Pixelborn Connect, and Pixelborn Connect is phenomenal. Pavel, huge shout out to you. Thank you so much for doing it. But one thing that Pixelborn Connect is doing is it's teaching people how to play game two, all right, or play day two where you can see deck lists. But they're forgetting how to play the blind mulligan. So you're handicapping yourself. So make sure you guys are remembering that this is something that needs to be practiced. With that being said, what does my blind mulligan look like generally? So these are on the play. OTP is on the play. These are some of the things that I'm looking to keep most of the time. I'm going to keep my Cindy's, my little Cindy's, my Ursula Vanessa's, my Ariel, my Shift Lines, Rapunzel, Strength of a Raging Fire. Now, depending on the matchup, some other things that I'm looking at keeping, also depending on the deck I'm running, is going to be Pete, Prince Naveen, A Whole New World, or Wheel, and Let the Storm Rage On. And the reason these are just sometimes is Let the Storm Rage On can be a very risky keep. If you keep Let the Storm Rage On, then it's typically because you have just a really strong hand. If I have a weaker hand, then I'm not keeping this because it's an uninkable card that might not see any play. Especially where we're starting to see, red purple running the 1/3s. We don't see as much Bucky anymore, so that's not as important. We're seeing a lot more Ursula on turn two from green decks. So let the Storm Rage on. There's nothing. If they play Diablo on turn one, then awesome. You can play Let the Storm Rage on as long as you have a Cindy. But if you don't have a Cindy, then Let the Storm Rage on is going to be picked off next turn. And now instead of playing instead of playing with a 6 card hand, you're playing or a 7 card hand. You're playing with a 6 card hand because your Let the Storm Rage on is just going to be thrown away. So it's a risky card to keep. But what about these other ones? Cindy, because of what she allows, right? She has a Singer 3 that lets you, if you drew into this, then you can cast it. If you drew into Strength of a Raging Fire, you can cast it. It's just strong. All right. Ursula, it is if one of the, if not the best cards into the draw. Now, luckily, or into the mirror. Luckily, we did get Pete and Naveen for the mirror matches to help us out a bit, but Ursula was kind of our only way to come back. But the other advantage of Ursula is that now you can play Ursula on 2, a 1/4. You can sing and such. That's awesome. But now you also you can look at your Rapunzel because if they misplay and they use a Smee and they quest or they quest with a Tippo, then you can hit with the Ursula on turn 4 and then on your turn 4 play the Rapunzel and you can draw one card. You get a 1/5 that quests for 2, and that's gonna be a strong play. That's gonna help you get the draw you need. The shift lines, of course, like I I always keep a shift line card. If I see a big Robin Hood, I'm keeping it and hoping for a little Robin Hood. That's just what the shift line is the best on turn three. Okay, like so it's really important. I've seen a lot of people talk about, well, if I see a big Robin Hood in my opening hand, but I don't see a little Robin Hood, then I throw away the big Robin Hood. I I don't understand that line of thought. I really don't, because the longer past turn three, your shift lines just get weaker generally. Turn three shift line is one of the biggest reasons that you play the shift line. Turn two shift line with queen is one of the biggest reasons that you play the shift line. So throwing it away is just an awful idea, because if you don't see the one drop Robin Hood, or the one drop Robin Hood on turn one or two, then you just ink the big Robin Hood. It's an easy ink that now you don't have to ink something else that you might be able to play. So I can't stress enough how extremely important it is that you're keeping these shift lines, whether it's the little one or the big one. So, and then Strength of a Raging Fire, because this is super strong into the blind, because even if you're into a green deck, if turn one, you have Cindy, then turn one, they play a Diablo. Turn two, as long as you play another character, you can take out the Diablo with Strength, and now they can't shift Diablo. If anything, if you don't have a turn one, then you can ink Strength of a Raging Fire on your turn two, and now they can't Diablo it. Or sorry, they can't Ursula it. So Strength of a Raging Fire is just a phenomenally strong card to keep, because it is inkable and because it's answering stuff. And I'm messing up. Now, on the draw, you'll notice it's a lot the same, except now I've thrown Pete and Naveen up here. The reason for that is, if you're in the mirror, Pete and Naveen, because remember, you're blind, so you don't know what they're playing yet. Pete on turn three is probably the most powerful thing you can do in the entire game on turn three in the mirror. And then Naveen on turn four lets you take everything back, especially if you played Ursula on turn two. Like if your turn two is Ursula, turn three is Pete, turn four is Naveen, then it most likely doesn't even matter that they went first. You're just gonna, that is the god tier play. And so that's just massive. All right, that's a massive play to be able to keep. So I'm looking at that just because of the potential to be in the mirror. Now, there is an argument to just never keep Naveen, because he is uninkable, and keeping uninkables blind, keeping uninkables period, can be a very bad move. So a lot of keeping Prince Naveen will also depend on what the rest of my hand looks like. For example, if I have 7 cards in my opening hand and 4 of them are uninkables, uh, if I throw 3 back, that means when I draw, if I'm running 18, so if I'm running 18 uninkables, then that means 14 uninkables are left in the deck for me to draw. So my chances are a little bit reduced. Now, if I see Prince Naveen as my only uninkable in my hand, and I still need a mulligan, then I might be more apt to throw back the Prince Naveen, because there's still 17 more uninkables in my deck. So just something to look at. You have to remember that you're looking at percentages. The mulligan is the most powerful part of Orcana. It changes everything about the whole game, and you have to remember that you're looking past just, all right, well, um I don't want Prince Naveen because he's uninkable. Well, if your hand consists of 6 or 7 uninkables, then you can afford to throw back the other 6 and keep Naveen, because you only have 12 uninkables left in your deck. Odds are in your favor that you don't draw another hand of uninkables. So this is just kind of where I'm at with Blind Mulligan. And I one thing I should have said at the start is, this isn't set in stone, right? I haven't been to a DLC yet. I haven't been playing long enough to go to a DLC. This is just my experience in the Ursula set champs, where I was able to take home some playmats and some Ursulas, and just what's worked for me. And generally, the general advice that I see from other, good players that have been to DLCs, have been to day twos, things like that. So, but you have to do what works for you, right? This is just thoughts. So general tips, and then we do have green and red blue, but your mulligan into most decks is going to be the same, regardless of if you're blind or you're not blind. One of the things that SteelSong does so well is that there's really no weak cards in Steel Song. That's what makes it so powerful. They all work together so well. So there's no tech cards necessarily that you're like, okay, I need this on turn two. Now there is exceptions, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But whether you're blind or not, generally you're going to keep the same exact stuff. You're going to keep the Cindy, the Ursula, the Ariel, things like that. The only time that you can do things like take a gamble. If you're in the mirror, you can take a gamble and you can keep Cindy. And if they play a Robin Hood on turn one, then you can play your Cindy on your turn one, and then blast his Robin Hood. So that there's still some people will say don't ever keep Cindy if you're on the draw in the mirror because you'll never get to play her. Worst case scenario, again, they play Cindy on turn one. You just ink Cindy. Like, there you go. You have a free ink now. Or you can take the gamble and just play your Cindy, and maybe they don't have the answer. They probably do, but if you're a gambling man, then you can take the gamble. But your mulligans will stay the same regardless. All right, it just doesn't change much whether you're blind or you're not. Now with some decks, it does though. Green decks, just assume that they always have Ursula on turn two. Like, just assume they always have Ursula on turn two. I can't stress that enough. Just assume that you're going to see Diablo into a Shift Diablo and a Bare Necessities on turn two. I can't stress that enough. If you don't believe me, go back to the Toronto DLC when in a best of three, he had Bare Necessities and Diablo, or sorry, Bare Necessities and Ursula on turn two in 2 games back to back. Okay, just always assume the worst when you're playing a green discard deck. Okay, with that being said, and on a more realistic note, the only song that I'm ever keeping into a green deck is Strength of a Raging Fire. That's it. Now you could you could make an argument to keep Let the Storm Rage on because they will most likely always play Diablo turn one. Now, the argument as to why you wouldn't want to do that, because if they don't play Diablo turn one and they just play Ursula on turn two, then there's nothing. If they don't play Diablo on turn one, there's no way that you can get rid of your Let Your Storm Rage on. So now you're just stuck with this uninkable card that is most likely going to get ripped on turn two. So I don't keep Let the Storm Rage on. The only song that I keep is Strength of a Raging Fire, because if I play Cindy, they play Diablo. I can still take out their Diablo with Strength of a Raging Fire as long as I have another character for turn two. And worst case scenario, if I don't, I can ink Strength of a Raging Fire instead of inking a character, which is going to be extremely important. So the other on the draw, I don't keep any songs if I'm on the draw. I just don't. Now if I mulligan and draw into some, sure, that's just bad luck. But I don't keep any songs on the draw because I don't want to see them get ripped. Now if I mulligan into one, hopefully it's an inkable and I ink it. If it's not, so be it. That's life. Move on. But this is generally how I attack green decks. Um, Now, the only exception might be that if you see deck lists and you're playing a green blue, a lot of green blue lists that I've seen aren't running Ursulas. So in that case, maybe you can keep the Let the Storm Rage on if you really wanted to. You'd be a little bit safer to do that. Or if you're on the play, you'd be a little bit safer to keep something like a wheel if you wanted to do that as well on your turn two or three, depending on the cards you have. So again, though, if you don't see a deck list, this is what I personally go with. Now, Ruby Sapphire, red blue. I call it red blue. So the big thing here is I'm going aggro. All right, I'm going aggro. I'm trying to take them out. I'm trying to get there before they get there. And they're getting there is the Fishbone Quill on 3, the Flaversham on 4, the Maui on 5, or even Maui on 4, the B prep on, what, could be on turn 5, turn 6. So those are the things that I'm trying to avoid. So I'm going full aggro. I'm looking for the Daisy, the Piglets, the Smees. Now, where things get a little difficult in this is if you're running the shift lines, then there is a great argument to just go whole new world, especially because you can go turn one daisy or yeah, you can go like turn one daisy and then you start tapping those daisies, right? Fill up their hand. Who cares? Because you're gonna whole new world. So you go turn one daisy, turn two, you can go queen or Robin Hood, depending on your shift line. And if you have two, then play two. And then turn three, you go Robin Hood and Whole New World. So you have two different lines of play when you're on the play into a red blue player. You can either go full aggro, Daisy, Piglet, Smee, Rapunzel, those types of cards, or you can go the kind of the aggro route with a Daisy on one, or a Robin Hood on one with a Piglet on two, or a Smee on two, and then a shift line. So, but if you go the shift line route, then if I see a whole new world, I'm not throwing away the whole new world. I'm keeping the whole new world so that it guarantees on turn three that I can do the shift line. So, two different routes when you're on the play playing against Ruby Sapphire: full aggro or the whole new world play. And those are just the things I would look at. I'd be hard pressed to go the whole new world route if I don't already have the shift line in hand. I'd rather just like if I see a Smee and a Piglet, then you can bet that I'm probably gonna just dig for full aggro. But again, what's in your hand? So this is 100% the hardest matchup for SteelSong. So never forget it. Like you can try, but they have everything they need to blow you out of the water. You're just trying to beat them. The Queen shift line. This is something I kind of already talked about. If I'm on Queen, then I'm keeping the Queen shift line in Whole New World, and I'm throwing that down on turn two and blowing them out. The only time I might wait is if I do have something like a Daisy in hand, then I will go Daisy. I will most likely go Daisy on turn one, and then Queen on turn two, and kind of literally what I just talked about. So, but the Queen shift line does allow another play of just going Queen, Queen, whole new world, and then now they you've changed their entire game plan. The only time I wouldn't do this is if they mulliganed like six. If they mulligan six, then there's a really good chance that they're gonna mulligan into some really bad hands. So another thought. But this is kind of that. I wanted to throw out some different. We'll go into here, and I wanted to throw out some just. If you didn't know, you can go to Dreamborn. You can go over here to menu. Let me move my mug here. You can go over here to menu, and then down here you can go to simulate, okay? And then simulate, all you're doing is you're practicing your mulligan. That's all you're doing. So you practice your mulligan and then you kind of decide on, hey, what am I going to do with this hand? So let's assume we're blind. If we're blind right now, but we're on the play, then how am I going to mulligan this? Um, Personally, we have 3 uninkables, right? So that leaves us 15 uninkables left in our deck. I like Smee on turn 2. I can get rid of a Cindy. Um, Now, you have 2 turn 2s here. Personally, I would keep both because they both offer very different options. And then I feel where I don't have a Robin Hood shift line, I would keep one Prince Naveen. It is risky because it is uninkable, but it allows for more options. So now we have something really good into the mirror. We have something good into the aggro or into red blue. And then also Smee opens up your Rapunzel. So let's see what we get. So a mulligan and draw 3. Um wow. So this is interesting, right? Because what we have here is a really good, turn 3 to set up whole new world. So if we really wanted to go that route, and a lot of it depends on what you're playing against. So, for example, if I'm playing against, um, let's say I'm playing against the mirror, then I can go turn one Cindy and ink the Ursula or the Smee. Most likely, I'd ink the Smee, go turn one Cindy, just in case. Because if I don't play turn one Cindy, then they're free to play whatever they want. So I play the Cindy to make them think that I have something that I could use. Now they have to consider that. So I ink the Smee, play Cindy, and then I draw. Now let's assume we have an inkable, whatever. Maybe it's not an uninkable. That's where maybe ink table is a better option because you can play it out. But this is just all around better for mulliganing. But the next your turn two, you can decide on. It depends on if you draw an inkable or not. If you don't draw an inkable, then you go ink the Ursula, you play the Lantern, and then at that point you're kind of forced into the Prince Naveen and Whole New World on turn three because you have so many high on inkables. And this is one of the risks of keeping Naveen is that what if you draw nothing else? So we got lucky that we drew into the Whole New World. Um, but one thing to keep in mind is that where you played Cindy on one, when you go Prince Naveen and Whole New World, you're still left with a Singer 3 and you're still left with a Singer 6. So even in the mirror, they have to answer that somehow. Because remember, you're on the play. So we'll look at another one. This is what we got. Let's say we're on the draw and it's blind. Okay. So I'm keeping Robin Hood. I'm throwing away Piglet, let the Storm Rage on, Zeus, and I'm keeping the Pete. One thing you have to remember is you have to play percentages. Most likely, the DLC will probably be something like 20% SteelSong, 20% Red Blue, um, 20% red purple, and it actually might be higher SteelSong in red blue. But what I'm getting at here, because math is hard on the fly, is that you're going to be seeing a lot of SteelSong. Okay, so keeping the Ursula into the Pete is going to be huge in the mirror on the draw. So I keep the Strength of a Raging Fire because it gives me something. Worst case scenario, it's inkable. So we mulligan 3. We got our shift line. We have a Cinderella that we can ink. And, we have let the Storm Rage on, so maybe we'll get to use it off of Ursula. So turn one, we ink the Cindy, and um, depending on what we're playing against, depending on what they play on turn one, we play the Robin Hood. And that opens up our shift line on three. So turn two, maybe ink the Pete to play Ursula. Again, it all depends on what you're playing against. So, but let's jump into something that you're more likely to see. So this is kind of just the one shift line with Robin Hood. We have the 4 Prince Naveens, the 4 Petes, but we have 3 Daisy Ducks. So let's go ahead. We'll simulate. We'll go to new game. So what do we got? We're blind. We're on the play. So we're feeling pretty juicy right now. So we've got a Prince Naveen. We've got a Robin Hood. Um, so looking at this, like this is I'd get rid of Daisy and probably Prince Naveen at this point, and probably Pete. Because right now, I can go Cindy and then Smee and let the Storm Rage on 2. There's an argument to keep both of these. There really is. Now, if I kept both of these, then I probably give up Robin Hood though. So, but this is how I would play this out. If you're a more aggro-esque player, then maybe you keep Daisy to play Daisy on one. But I am not an aggro-esque player, so I will almost never keep Daisy on the blind. So we mulligan, and this is not good. But that's just bad luck, right? You have to remember that when you are mulliganing, like bad luck does happen. And I talked about this at the very beginning of the video in that you can't afford to do really high mulligans because you run so many high uninkables. So with this game, we go Cindy on one, and we probably ink Robin Hood because at this point we can go Smees on turn two and turn three, and maybe draw into a Rapunzel. Maybe draw like Rapunzel would be the best case scenario to draw into, um, but Smees aren't bad plays into anything because they're questing for two, and it trades into Fox, it trades into Snake. Like it's a decent play. If anything, you quest twice, get 4 lore, and then it just kind of sits there with 2 damage a until you draw the Rapunzel. So options. We'll do this one more time, and then we'll go to a double shift line. So this is an opening hand that I'm not happy with. We get rid of World's Greatest. We get rid of Piglet. We get rid of a Strength of a Raging Fire. And again, Prince Naveen. And this is, I'll be honest, like I'd love to see what DeCandio would do with some of these Prince Naveen hands because he's huge on Prince Naveen, right? Um, like he's really big on running four. So I'd be curious if he's keeping them. Maybe he gives up the shift line for the Prince Naveen. But so far, this is what I would go with. Keep the strength, the Robin, the Ursula, draw three. Whew. Oh, I didn't click the Naveen. Oops. Well, yeah. So this is a good example of what happens if you do keep the Prince Naveen. But because right now we ink bare necessities, we pass. All right. But this is what happens if you do keep the Prince Naveen. Remember, we're high on inkables. Okay, so you keep a Prince Naveen, we drew into another one and another uninkable. And now we have three cards that we can't even play until possibly turn three when we can sing with Let the Storm Rage on. So it's very dangerous game to be keeping on inkables. So we'll jump into one more. We'll jump into a double shift line and let's go to simulate new game. So, ooh, spicy, spicy, spicy. So this is interesting. We have I'd get rid of the one Ursula, and then what makes this so interesting, I'd get rid of one Robin Hood and one Ursula. Now, again, we're high on inkables, so do we keep this? The advantage is that oh, this is tough. If any, oh man, if anything, we could get rid of Ursula, and this is where double shift line mulligans get pretty messy. Am I on the play or on the draw? If I'm on the draw, then I never keep Whole New World. If I'm on the play, then there's a decent argument to keep it, especially because we have one piece of the shift line and we have two pieces of the shift line. So, but if I'm blind, then right now I probably hmm, see this is tough. This is really tough because turn one we probably go Cindy, and then our turn two depends on what they play or what they ink on if we go Ursula or if we go Robin Hood. And then it also will change based off of what we draw. But we just saw in the last hand what happens when you keep uninkables. Um, it can be extremely dangerous. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw them back. On the draw, we always throw it back. On the play, there's an argument, but where we don't have the shift line, we don't. We're not going to risk it. We're siding with caution, and there we go. So even with throwing four back, still no shift line. So our turn one could be something like ink the queen, play the Cindy. Our turn two could be, depending on what we draw, ink the Robin. You could either ink the Ursula or ink the Robin Hood. And if you ink the Ursula, then you go Robin Hood, Daisy Duck. Um, or you can ink the Robin Hood to go Ursula and then set up for the turn three Ariel. Because turn three Ariel, with an Ursula and a Cinderella, you can pretty much play anything you get except for the wheel. So, all right, let's look at another one. So we'll say that we're lucky enough to be on the play. We lost the last game, so unlucky. We'll get rid of World's Greatest Criminal, Pete's, Zeus, and we're happy with this. Turn one, turn two, turn three, and then use Ursula to sing whatever we get. We'll draw. Man, guys, my luck today with these Let the Storm Rage on is not good. So with this hand, it's kind of exactly what I said. We ink the queen, and this is where you have a choice to make, because you can ink the queen to play Robin. Yeah, so you'd probably just ink the queen, play Robin Hood, and then turn two, depending on what you draw, ink the Strength of a Raging Fire to play Ursula. And now you can start singing these. If anything, what you can do, because you're on the play, is turn three. So turn two, you played Ursula. Turn three, you sing Let the Storm Rage On with Ursula on their Ursula Vanessa or whatever it was, and draw a card. If it's inkable, then you can hard cast another Let the Storm Rage On to clear pretty much anything that they've played at this point. So that does represent 4 damage. Don't forget, just because your songs and you play singers, doesn't mean you can't hardcast songs as well. That's a lot of tempo in one turn if you take out their only character on board and you still have a Vanessa on board with an Ariel coming in. So, with all that being said, this video probably went longer because all my videos go longer than I ever plan. But this is just general advice, okay? It's nothing set in stone. One of the fun things about SteelSong is that there's a lot of different ways you can play the early turns, especially depending on the build you're running. Double shift lines, more aggro, Decandio song. If you go back to Bivens song with Pride Lands and things like that, so there's just a lot of different ways you can play it. There's even people playing no wheel songs, heavy character song decks. There's a lot of different avenues. The point is that you, the biggest thing to remember is that you're a high uninkable deck. When you're playing something like a blue deck, you don't need to worry so much about being super high uninkable because you have Fishbone Quill. For us, for SteelSong, we don't have that light. Okay, we don't have that ability to be like, oh look, 3 Prince Naveen's. Well, as long as I get to turn 3 for Fishbone, I can ink them. We can't do that. So you have to remember that when you're playing SteelSong, the difference between a good SteelSong player and a bad SteelSong player is that they learn how to win games without seeing the perfect hand. Okay? They learn how to most optimally use the cards that they have when they don't see the perfect, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 into Whole New World. And that's something that has to be, you just have to put in the time and the reps, and it's something that I'm still learning how to do. But it's the people who are doing it well are we see them do well at the DLCs. Um, so you just have to practice. And if that's ink decks, perfect. If it's just practicing mulligans on Dreamborn, that's perfect. But finally, just to remember, these are just thoughts, right? If you don't want to play this way, if you like to be more risky, then by all means play more risky. If you like to be more conservative, then be more conservative and don't ever keep the Whole New World. Don't ever keep uninkables. It's your play style. Play style means everything because if you don't like the play style that someone taught you, then you're not going to do well with it. Um, so, with that being said, in the same way I always do. Ladies and gentlemen, drink your water, do your push ups. We're trying to stay happy and healthy here. The two words go together. I promise if you're healthy, whatever that healthy looks like for you, then mentally, physically, you will be happier. It's going to happen. The science is there, it's proven, it's fact. Happy and healthy. That's all that matters. Illumineers, I'm out. Have a great day. Enjoy your games.